Hello guys, welcome to my channel. I hope everything is okay in your life. This video series has been prepared for general features of the classes in BDO to be conveyed to you by the Classmasters in appropriate way. The information contained in this video is limited and will not be a detailed guide. In the content you will meet, there will be an interview about the structure of the class in general. If you have friends around you who have questions about this class, they will probably be able to find general answers. The purpose of interview is to convey the class to you in a short and fun way. First, you will watch official trailer of the class, then we will start chatting with our guests. During the chat, I will add as many images as possible and try to provide you with a better information transfer. I hope you enjoy these contents. All these and similar classes will be completed and published in time. If you do not want to miss the moment when they are published, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button. Enjoy watching. Hello guys, welcome. Today's guest is EtsuMoon for Dark Knight class. Welcome Etsu, how are you?
Yo, pretty good. What about you?
Thank you so much. May you please introduce yourself? Who is EtsuMoon?
Well, first starting off, my name's EtsuMoon. I'm 24. I've been playing BDO for about 4 or 5 years, and I'm a Dark Knight main in BDO, NA server.
How did you find BDO? From a friend or website? How you go into MMORPG games? How did you decide to play?
Well, I found BDO starting off like with a friend group. One of my friends in our friend group said, "Hey, let's check out this MMO. It has really good combat," and yeah, I got into it that way. I'm not really usually a fan of MMOs at all. This would actually probably be like my first real MMO that I've played. I got sucked into it like the first week, playing like about 100 hours on a Maywa.
How many years have you been playing your class? Is this your first class? Are there any other classes that you started game with or tried? All of them.
I've been maining DK for I did like 2 years on her, took a break from her when she was in a bad state, and then came back. And now I'd say it's been about another 2 years since I've been on her again. So a total of 4 years. My first class that I played was a Meiwa, And the only reason being was because it had a katana, and I thought that was really, really cool. And when I had first played, I ended up getting about 100 hours in the first week, which was very abnormal for me with trying out any MMO. And yeah, I also played other classes like Ninja. I've tagged that a lot. Ninja's really cool. Awakening in Succession. I've tagged Succession Mystic before as well. And I did main Sork for a pretty long period, around like a year and a half to almost 2 years.
I want to add this question. I know Dark Knight is one of the oldest class in the game and also face of BDO, I can say, one of the beautiful class in the game. But what about FPS issue on Dark Knight? Do you need high FPS like Valkyrie, Warrior, Berserker, Sorcerers, and etc.?
High FPS definitely is a very big benefit to Dark Knight's kiting, of course, just because, with lower frames, you're going to be stuck in animations. I would say, like, for those small scale fights that you're going to do, like 5v5s or like 10v10s, like, you definitely want really high frames. And then, of course, like in Siege, like higher frames are going to matter, but there's only so much you could do, like in a laggy environment. But I would say, yeah, you benefit immensely from having high FPS. It's still playable at low FPS, but you're certainly going to be a lot more limited on your options and what you can do at lower environments.
Do you think your class is newbie friendly? How would you rate your class out of 10 in terms of difficulty in PvE and also PvP?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty newbie friendly in the sense that like the class doesn't have a lot of it doesn't have a high barrier to entry like a lot of other classes. Like for example, like Sork, you need to learn like a lot of cancels just before you can move at all in the class. But on on DK, it's very straightforward, especially like Awakening and even Succession as well. Like you just click your button, you do your ability, boom, like you're ready to go. As for like difficulty, like for PvP, like I said before, the barrier to entry is low. I'd put it at about like a 6 for barrier to entry, and then the skill ceiling is very, very high for Awakening, and both suck. Now for difficulty in PvE, I would say that the PvE, I'd put them both about a 6. More so Awakening like at a 6 or 7 and Succession lower. With Awakening, it's a lot higher APM just because you have a lot of cooldowns to track, but then you also get Frontal Guard in return for that, which is really nice for staying protected and grinding. Whereas for Succession, it's a lot easier to grind on, like input-wise, but you suffer at less protection or you're in more SA ability, so you take more damage. I'd say like the main issue that people have when grinding on these specs is HP. So most opt in for an HP pot just because the HP sustain on DK isn't the greatest.
So in total, we can give a stats to her in a middle, close to easy.
Yeah.
Do you prefer Awakening or Succession right now? Why?
I prefer Awakening, especially like in large scale uncapped environments, just because I genuinely have a lot more fun with it. Hybrid like melee range style is a very interesting playstyle that I never got to experience in other games, and it's just in my opinion like one of the funnest playstyles that you can have in BDO. Now that's just for like large scale and like open world uncapped content. For Arena of Solar specifically, I've been opting more into Succession just because it has more damage at like the lower AP values, and it also has more tools to fight people like in a 3v3. It's more designed for that type of content.
I published a PV tier list about all classes. May you please check this tier list results for DK? How is accurate? Can you please analyze it?
Yeah, I would say this is pretty accurate. Early game spots, Awakening is really good. You have a lot of skills to spam. Crowded spots, I would actually say like spots like Centaurs, like Awakening doesn't really do that well at because their AoE is not really, like, contrary to belief, it's not that big. It's more like conal in front of you. It's not ginormous. End game spot, she's pretty good just for the fact that she has like a lot of frontal to keep herself protected and not get bursted as hard. And the durability is pretty appropriate too for Awakening, just because again the frontal keeps you safe. Mobility is also really high in Awakening. Now for Succession, the early game grind spots being at a 3 makes sense. Crowded spots, Succession is definitely way better at than Awakening just because of how gigantic the AoEs are for Wheel and Lunacy. The mobility is also very good, and the durability being at a 3 stars appropriate too, just because you don't have as many frontals as Awakening does to keep yourself protected from damage.
I want to add this one. This class is not that strong when you get CC'd by some mob. For example, while you're grinding at Holland, if you stunned by mob, do not expect that be strong, I can say. She's fragile, I know.
Yeah, if you're on the ground at a spot like Olin's or like Hex, you might just die for sure. You do have to be careful. You do have to be aware. But that's part of the fun.
Let's check DK in detail. May you please give us a bit information about Awakening PvE for early game, for mid game spots, I mean Sakraya, Stars and Blood Monastery, and at end game spots, Kaifin, Rasia, Olin's Valley, Hexe, Trolls, Crypto even maybe, if you ever experienced it.
Yeah, sure. So for one spot zones, Awakening has a lot of mobility to get from pack to pack and a lot of range skills, which is really nice. It's just overall pretty chill, but the main complaint that majority of players, if not all, are going to have is that it doesn't really get any mana return, and you end up chugging through a lot of mana potions. Don't worry, it is a pain at first, but over time, when you go to those mid-range spots, when you don't one-shot packs, your abilities in Awakening actually scale. And the more hits you get off on your abilities, the more mana return you get back, which you don't really benefit from one-shot spots, but the spots where you're not one-shotting, you do get that mana return. So it's not as bad. And you can also use like Spirit Perfume elixirs with your Frenzy elixir to get your mana back even more, not really have that issue. Spots like Akhman, Histria, Sakraya, it's really nice on Awakening just because, again, you have a lot of range and you also have a lot of range pulling skills. So you're able to group up packs a lot easier and not really have to do awkward movement in between packs to pull mobs. So that's really nice with Awakening. Succession also has range pulling too if you're worried about it. For endgame spots, the nice thing about Awakening is definitely going to be, like we mentioned earlier, that it has a lot of frontals and ability to keep itself protected. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit more APM. However, the sense of safety, just having your frontal guard, is really nice. It definitely takes a lot of the pressure off.
I'm watching Lua's videos on YouTube. Do you know him? Lua.
Yes, Lua BDO. Definitely my go-to for if I'm like seeing if a new spot comes out and I need to know how to like grind it. I usually actually go to Lua first. Sometimes I'll even DM him and be like, yo, how are you doing at this spot? Or what should I be doing?
I can say he's very, very experienced about PvE on Dark Knight. When I saw that 17k trash on Hexa Sanctuary, I just shocked. Then I think about it, yeah, it can be doable because she's fast, can give back attack damage immediately after she teleport back, and it's doable, I can say.
It is really cool because it's like it scales up. Like the harder you try, the more effort you put into it, the more you can get out of it, which is a really nice thing to have in a class to feel like you're not truly capped. Lua specifically is, like you said, a very, very good grinder, and if you actually go back to like his earlier vids, you'll see like randomly, I think like he'll sell his Kaffers from his armors or something for a gain, and you'll see him in Gyphins like with 331 DP, and all I can think is, holy, like how can like you could do that on this class? Like it's crazy. Like yeah, it's gonna be sweaty, but it's certainly very doable, which is a really nice thing to know like that you could do that.
I have to add this, just warning for newbies, do not try that 330 DP Gyphin at your home, please. Because Lua and EtsuMoon, these kind of guys, very experienced about, especially for spots and also their classes. Do not try at all. May you please give us a bit information about Awakening PvP? 1v1, 1vx, Arena of Solar, or 5v5 or 10v10, and also large scale node and siege wars.
Yes. So let's start with the 1v1s. 1v1s for Awakening is a lot more linear because you're mainly focusing on outranging your opponent, spacing very well against them. And the only CCs that you're realistically going to really get against your opponent are mainly going to be Seeds and Nocturne. There's a few more catches you can also get, but they're a lot more risky. But yeah, for 1v1s, Awakening is definitely a lot more linear. If you're ever worried about that, Succession is more focused for 1v1s and is really good at getting behind your opponents if anyone is ever interested in that side of things. Now, for 1vxing, Awakening specializes on, again, spacing, outranging, and its kite mobility. It's very, very good at like these 1vx situations where you go up, you try to poke with Seeds, and then you back off, and then people will start chasing you, and as they're chasing you, you can try and chip them out, CC them, and then take them out when they're least expecting it. It's really, really good in those environments. Like 5v5 environments, it's also still really good. Depending on how much focus people have on you, it'll be difficult to like really rat. But what you're really good at is follow-up damage for your teammates and also peeling for them as well. So you still like have a role in those small 5v5s. It's just a different role that you will have compared to like 1vx. The 1vx situations still apply in large scale, of course, when we're talking 50 mans or siege. You can still do those 1vx approaches by just, going up, trying to poke a ball, and if people chase you, try to pull them away and take them out. If not, keep going for a pick. Keep trying to get someone on the ground and then follow up with it. She's really, really good in those environments just because she can rat. A lot of people don't expect you to, what I call, third party a fight and just get behind them when they least expect it and try to take them out. Worst case, they chase you and you can just run away with people chasing you, which is really, really good for your main ball fight. Or best case is they chase you, you kill them, or they don't chase you and you just keep poking from behind and picking people off over time. She's really good in all these environments.
Let's talk about Succession. What about Succession PvE? Early game, mid game, and end game.
So Succession PvE, I would still say is pretty good. It'll feel like a little bit, it's hard to say. I want to say a little bit, it will feel a little bit slower, but it isn't. It has huge gap closes from pack to pack. You still have Airstrike, Twilight Dash sends you really far. You can just spam Legacy between packs to kill them. It's just fine at like the lower end, like the one-shot spots. When you get to crowded locations like Sakraya or Centaurs, especially Centaurs is the best example I can give to highlight the contrast between both specs. Succession has way more AoE than Awakening just based off of Wheel and Lunacy alone, just being almost like triple or quadruple its size. It's very big and very good for those environments. It also makes it so like pulling's a lot easier when you're DPSing a pack. It's not as stressful trying to weave in your skills at the right spot of the pack. The AoEs are big enough so that you don't have to worry about that. You still have about 2 to 3 pulling skills that you can use, so you don't have to worry about giving those up. It's really, really good at those one shots in mid-range locations. Now for Gyfins, like the high end, it's still really good, but you might find that you need a little bit more DP to survive just because you take a lot of the damage up front, right? It did recently get a buff to give you frontal guard on Ravage Rake, which definitely made things significantly a lot easier, but it can still feel a little claustrophobic at times depending on your gear for this location. I will say Succession out of the two is actually really fun to grind on, has pretty good HP sustain, and the APM is not as high as Awakenings, but don't confuse that with being low APM. It's actually just still high enough APM to be interesting and fun, and it's not so low that it's boring, which I think is the really nice thing about Succession compared to Awakenings grind.
What about Succession PvP?
Succession PvP is really good. The damage is really, really high. And like, just to give you an idea, like if you don't know, like human damage crystals boost your damage up by a lot, and like Awakening with human damage crystals will do less damage than Succession without them every time. Succession's damage is it is very high. So you notice like at these lower capped environments, the one that you see more is Succession, just because the damage is that much higher at base. Like it is a ton of damage. We can talk about like what the drawback that most people highlight there for Succession is that it's a melee spec and that you have to be in melee to do your damage. My take on this is that it's like that is true. Like if you're more in the fight melee style, then you're going to take more damage. However, Succession has very good gap closers and very good ability to get out of a fight. So like in these like 1v1 environments, 1v1s, it's very good. Has a lot of tools to get behind someone. Small scale like 5v5s, it's very, very good for those. It's very good at getting behind people. Bombing for large scale, it's also very good for bombing and picking people off to the side. It would just depend on you would have to play the playstyle right in these environments when it becomes large scale. You can't be greedy going down the middle. Your goal is mainly going to be like playing on the sides and trying to 1v2, 2v2, like with your teammates, basically just the side of the ball that you're going to fight. It's basically your main goal. And for Siege, it definitely gets a lot more difficult for sure when there's more people around, just because generally you're fighting other range classes. You still have to play the sides of a ball. You still have to wrap around, but you're definitely going to experience death a lot more in Succession in these large scale fights than you would in Awakening. But what you do get in return is the ability to get more multi-feeds with Succession, just because it's kind of designed to bomb in those environments. So more deaths, but also potentially higher kill amounts too. Just depends on what you want.
I think we talked about Dark Knight and that's enough. Let's talk about game itself. What do you think about BDO for current situation?
BDO in its current state, that one's an interesting one because it's definitely, there's a lot of sides to it, right? I would say like for the state of the game, PvP has definitely been better. However, like the game's definitely been harder to get into back then. So like back in the day, it took so much time investment to get into BDO. Now, you have seasonals, you have like all this extra catch-up mechanics to get in the game that for new players in general, I'd say is a pretty good time to come back into the game for sure. It's very easy to get into compared to before. Obviously like PvP PvP since the dawn of time could always use more love, always use more content, always use more help. But there are, like, compared to back then, a lot more stuff in the game, like the new RBF map and Arena of Solaire being introduced like in the past year, definitely massive for like the PvP environment. So if you're looking to get into the game, I'd say now is still a really good time. It's really easy to get into and there's a lot more content.
Thank you. So, if you have a chance to add new feature to BDO or change something, what would it be?
Yeah, so we actually talked about this earlier where we the thing that you mentioned was like world bosses, and I agreed on like basically the premises of it was that world boss content needs to have more incentive to go to these bosses, which I totally agree on. It feels like world bosses back then, like let's say 4 years ago, you used to stay awake for hours past your bedtime just to like go to Dimtree and have a chance at a Dimtree armor. Like that's how into it we were back then. And nowadays you go to a world boss, there isn't really any incentive to go to just a normal non-Bloodstorm Nightmare world boss. There isn't really much incentive to go to those. And the worst part is these Nightmare versions or Bloodstorm or whatnot, people don't even want to go to those because you risk your crystals and dying and losing stuff out of it. And the payment isn't worth the potential loss, especially like with Gen Spec evasions in the game or Gen Vipers. I'm definitely adding more incentives to go to these world bosses would be really cool. For example, like we talked about how there's items in the game that are very hard to obtain, like corrupted oil potions, which if you don't know, corrupted oil is used to make immortal elixirs. And when you put these in your elixirs, like deep seas or perfumes, when you die, you do not lose them until the elixir times out. But getting those corrupted oil elixirs have pretty much been gated by only being obtainable through like an event system, like a login reward, which is unfortunate. It would be really cool if you added those kinds of things to world bosses to give people more of an incentive to go to these, because right now there isn't really much of an incentive. The next thing like that you mentioned was right, like even if you added incentive to these bosses, it's very hard to get to them depending on your location, especially if you're grinding in these locations across the map like Gyphins or Histria or underwater. Getting to Garmoth or Karanda or Zarka or Bloodstorm Nuva are very out of the way, right? You mentioned an idea that was really good where you make like you put like this icon like right next to your map when a boss spawns, and then you click like go to the boss and it like teleports you to this boss. And when you get teleported to the boss through the selection on your screen, you don't lose crystals when you die to it. You can't walk out of the area or range of the boss. You can only stay in the area and hit it, and once it's dead, then it'll TP you back, which I thought was a very, very good idea to give people more room or more ability to get to a boss. Because right now, as it stands, most people are in these areas that are very good silver per hour across the map, not anywhere near the world bosses.
Thank you so much for this information. So what are your advices for newbie or returnee players or whoever wants to reroll Dark Knight?
Advice. This one, it's used a lot, but really take your time when you're playing this game. This game, like everyone said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. When you sprint, you're gonna burn out, and it doesn't have to be like that. Just take your time and have some fun. If you're thinking about rolling DK, I would say this is the best time to ever roll DK in its history of being alive. It's probably the funnest it's ever been. It's very versatile. Yeah, it's going to have its hard matchups. Yeah, it's going to have some counters that are really unfair. But even with those counters, like, and those bad times, I think it's still like one of the, if not the funnest class in the game, just playstyle wise and how it operates. Just keep in mind that this class for Awakening and Succession are both viable in PvP as well as PvE, and not every class has that luxury of having both of its specs being viable. So I would say now is a good time. Like if you want to reroll DK, just keep in mind, hey, if you ever get bored of Awakening, you still have Succession to bounce back on too. So now's a perfect time to play it.
Alright, we are coming towards the end of the interview, and is there anything you would like to add?
Not really. You guys can find me like on twitch.tv/EtsuMoon. I also have a YouTube channel called EtsuMoon. I put some videos of Dark Knight on there, some like little clips. You can come out to my stream, say hi, ask questions.
I want to say thank you. You accept my invitation and you helped all the viewers of this channel, all the BDO community for Dark Knight and also for game itself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Awesome channel, by the way.
Thank you so much. Alright guys, do not forget, BDO is just a game. Have a nice game.